Love it. Can we give a big round of applause for the Earth? That which sustains us, and the reason we're here tonight to celebrate Earth Week and hear from Philadelphia area artist Rebecca Rutstein. My name is Joseph Lennon. I am the co-chair with Al Ortega of the Strategic Initiative for Climate Justice and Sustainability. I'd like to just thank one person, Sue Stein, who's taking a picture in the back. Can we give Sue a round of applause for all her organizing? The Earth Week committee for the speaker, I also want to thank them for all of their work in organizing this. I want to thank you all for being here. My job is simple tonight. I have two things. I'm going to introduce the introducer, and I need to remind everyone that if you brought food in here, please make sure every little speck of it goes with you in your belly or in your hands when you leave, as well as containers, because we're not allowed to have it in here. Okay. The other announcement is that the Wildcat Thrift Store is on again tomorrow, back by popular demand. This will go from 12 to 3 in the Oreo and Connolly Plaza. Please come if you're interested in swapping and taking or in providing. There's lots of stuff. We're trying to reuse. Okay, and there's a trip to Martha's Farm on Saturday if you haven't heard of Martha's Farm, something to check out. Also, everyone in the the Office for Sustainability has made this event possible. So thank you all. I know Ali is here and others, Father John and others. So please, maybe just a round of applause for the whole team. Maggie Hobson Baker created the mural that's outside of Connolly. If you haven't seen it, you've probably walked by it. It's celebrating the SDG number 12. And Maggie's an artist that teaches in our communication department. We're very fortunate to have her on faculty. And she is a local artist also. Her studio is in Phoenixville. I'm not going to say too much, but please give Maggie another warm round of applause.
Hello, everyone. It's good to see so many people. I am Maggie. Welcome, everyone. I want to begin by thanking the Strategic Initiative for Climate Justice and Sustainability, the Office of Sustainability, the College of Liberal Arts and Science, the Office of the Provost, the Ethics Program, the Department of Geography and the Environment, the Center for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Stewardship, and Sustainable Engineering, for all of the work that they do for our campus and for the larger community, and for bringing us together this evening to hear our artist talk with Rebecca Rutstein. Art and Advocacy, creating a deeper connection with the natural world. I get the pleasure of introducing Rebecca. And thank you, Rebecca, for coming and being with us this evening. Rebecca Rutstein is an multidisciplinary artist whose practice bridges art, science, and technology. For over 20 years, she has created painting, sculpture, interactive installation, and public art inspired by the natural world. Her work sheds light on places and processes hidden from viewer to foster deeper connection in the face of our climate crisis. Rutstein's scientific collaborations have taken her around the world, including 8 ocean expeditions and 3 deep sea dives in the Alvin submersible, supported by the National Science Foundation, a Pew Fellowship in the Arts recipient with recognition from the National Endowment for the Arts. She has been featured on NPR, ABC, NBC, CBS, and in the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Huffington Post, Vice, and Vogue magazines. Rutstein's work has been exhibited internationally in more than 40 solo shows and can be found in over 50 public collections, including the Philadelphia Museum of Art, Georgia Museum of Art, National Academy of Sciences, Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, U.S. Department of State, and U.S. Consulate in Thailand. Rutstein received a BFA from Cornell University and an MFA from University of Pennsylvania, and is represented by the Bridget Meyer Gallery in Philadelphia. Welcome, and I'm looking forward to hearing you talk about your work.
Thank you. Thanks so much for being here. It's an honor to be here. I can't think of a better time to be together and share about my work than during a week celebrating nature and our planet Earth. I was about to list off all of those departments that Maggie just listed off to thank for inviting me to be part of this celebration. So I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge them again. The Office for Sustainability, the Strategic Initiative for Climate, Justice and Sustainability, the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, the Office of the Provost, the Ethics Program, the Department of Geography and the Environment, the Center for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Stewardship, and Sustainable Engineering, and Sue Stein. So thank you. I wanted to list all of those partners because I think thinking about all of these people that have contributed to Earth Week is a testament to this university, to Villanova. It's a testament to how integrated sustainability and stewardship are on your campus. I admire that with your roots in Augustinian and Catholic values, which emphasize service and care for one's community, that respect for the earth is an essential principle guiding the university. You're part of a community where initiatives like recycling, composting, upcycling, a circular economy, rain gardens, international projects related to sustainability, research on making more efficient data centers, and green infrastructure and urban planning are just some of the ways our environmental crisis is being addressed on your campus. In time of extreme division and polarization, as we are now more than ever, all of us need to stand up and be unwavering voices for environmental stewardship. A few years ago, I had a show at the Delaware County Community College as part of programming around a school-wide reading of the book Under the Sky We Make by writer, climate scientist Kimberly Nicholas. In it, she compels every reader to grapple with our environmental crisis and find ways as individuals and in our communities to use our skills and talents towards stewardship and being a positive influence. My art is a way that I found to be a so-called ambassador of our planet, or for our planet. Harnessing art to connect people with the natural world has really become my life's work. I'm a multidisciplinary artist creating work inspired by the natural world, and for over 20 years, I've been trying to illuminate environmental processes and the interconnectedness of all things in nature. While my practice is deeply rooted in painting, over the years, it's expanded to include other mediums, including sculpture, interactive installation, working with light and sensors, immersive video, sound experiments, and public art. Really, the element that weaves through all of my work is a desire to shed light on hidden systems in the natural world and make the invisible visible through the language of art. Delving into public art, I'm not seeing, there we go. Delving into public art over the last decade has really transformed my practice in helping me create the kind of scale I want to achieve with my work, and to also create the kind of access I want my work to have, getting it out of a gallery setting and into a public space where it can be viewed and experienced by many more people. But really the transcendent experience of my career has been collaborating with scientists, especially on research vessels at sea, and seeing this otherworldly place with my own eyes, going down in a submersible to the bottom of the ocean. It's these experiences, this is something that changes you as a person, and it fundamentally changed me, and it changed the way I see the world and view humanity's place in it. I feel passionately about creating visual and immersive experiences that shed light on places and processes hidden from view, to connect the public, to connect us more deeply with the natural world in the face of our climate crisis. Jacques Cousteau famously said, "You only protect what you love." And so I'm trying to create moments of connection and wonder and awe about the natural world as a means to foster stewardship. I firmly believe in a liberal arts education. While attending undergrad as an art major at Cornell in Ithaca, New York, my art classes taught me the skills of art making, but it were the courses outside of my major that helped me to develop my voice. I took a geology class on a whim for non-science majors. We would go on field trips to experience firsthand breathtaking, exposed geology like this, and learn the stories of glaciation and erosion that slowly carved the landscape. It changed my life. It would be 10 years before these themes etched themselves onto my canvases, but the seed had been planted. I started thinking about geology and plate tectonics as almost a metaphor for interpersonal relationships, thinking about all the friction and tension happening underneath the surface as sometimes something that would cause upheaval above. And so I wanted to learn about geology of different regions and explore those places and create visual narratives about them. And so I started applying for residencies and ended up in the Canadian Rockies for 2 summers in the early 2000s, exploring the Canadian Rockies and the formation of that mountain chain. And then in 2005, I ended up on the big island of Hawaii to explore the Kilauea volcano and the formation of the island chain, to create visual narratives about that place. And it was there that I came upon this map of the ocean floor. This is a multi-beam sonar map. It's imaged through sound waves. Essentially, you have hundreds of sound waves being sent down from the hull of a ship to measure the depth of the bottom of the ocean. And it was just awe-inspiring for me to see this landscape that's hidden from view, that's hidden by the horizon of the water. And I realized that the islands themselves were just a little speck of this landscape that I wanted to see more of. And so I had this dream. I wanted to go down in a submersible, go down to the bottom of the ocean and see this hidden landscape. So I caught up Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, which operates the only public submersible in the country. It's called Alvin. It's Navy-owned. And I was like, hi, I'm a young artist. This is 2005. I was young then. Anyway, I was like, hi, I'm an artist, and I'm really passionate about the ocean, and I really want to go down to the bottom of the ocean, and how do I go about getting in the submersible? And they sort of politely declined and said, this is a very expensive endeavor, and we reserve it for scientists doing research, et cetera. Tabled that dream, but vowed that someday I would get down to the bottom of the ocean. So in the meantime, I started exploring the ocean through my own imagination and thinking about this sort of floating space, and also doing a lot of research. I researched a woman named Marie Tharp, who was a cartographer and oceanographer through the 40s, 50s, and 60s. She actually mapped the ocean floor using single echo soundings, which is similar to the multi-beam sonar I was just telling you about. And she mapped the entire world's oceans with this data. She had never gone on a ship. She essentially discovered the mid-Atlantic rift zone in the Atlantic Ocean, which is this giant seam that is evidence for plate tectonics, which was not the accepted theory at the time. She was hugely inspiring to me. I created this homage to her at the Philadelphia airport in 2008. And again, just sort of thinking about this imagined world under the ocean. As I continued making these paintings and working through these ideas, I became less interested in the viewer. I wanted the viewer to get lost in the space. I wanted the viewer to I wanted there to be more ambiguity with the surface of the painting. And so I started losing the recognizable imagery that was a reference to scale. And I started just paring down the paintings. And eventually I was left with this painting in 2012, which was essentially sort of a wireframe mapping of the ocean floor, but essentially had the ambiguity I was looking for. It sort of had, you couldn't tell whether you were looking at through the lens of a microscope or maybe looking at satellite data of continents. So I liked that ambiguity that started happening. In 2012, I ended up back out on a residency in Iceland, which is actually on the Mid-Atlantic Rift Zone that I was just describing to you. It's an incredible place if you're interested in geology. It's got fire, it's got ice, it's got glaciers and volcanoes, and an incredible, inspiring place to learn about these processes that are happening on our planet. I did a lot of exploration in the south of the island, exploring the glaciers, and created this painting you see here on the left, which large scale, did that in my studio in Philadelphia and exhibited this at the Bridgemere Gallery in Philadelphia. I loved what was happening with these sort of undulating forms in the large painting, but really wanted to explore kind of breaking the boundaries of the canvas. And so I ended up creating what you see on the right, which is essentially taking these undulating forms of the painting and laser cutting them out of steel and creating actual dimensional forms. And so even though they're subtly dimensional, they are dimensional. I loved sort of the ambiguity and the sort of juxtaposition of the materiality of them. They almost look like lacy cut paper, but they're actually laser cut steel. And so there's this play between material and a play between mechanical and hand-drawn. They almost feel like they're computer generated, but they're actually all hand-drawn lines that were then gone through this mechanical process. From here, I got really excited about working in this material, and I brought one of these pieces on the floor and stood it up, and it made me think about clouds, made me think about flying on an airplane and seeing a blanket of clouds. And so I wanted to create a room of these clouds. And so this was an exhibit in 2015. It was almost like deconstructing a painting. And as a painter and someone trained in painting, to have a room without anything on the walls was sort of a surprise for myself. But I was excited about the direction of this. I love the sort of ambiguity, not being sure if you're looking at maybe a coral reef, or maybe you're looking at clouds, or maybe mountains. For scale, these are my children at the time. They're now 16 and 18. But so this was in 2015. But the pieces are about 5 by 10 feet, and I love being able to sort of move through the pieces. Those were accompanied by paintings that were inspired, again, also by clouds and by sky tone variations. So you have the big painting in the background called Blue Hour, and then you have here cumulonimbus. Again, this is really exemplary of some of the juxtapositions I like to create in my work, playing with sort of atmospheric space along with really graphic space. Another painting here in the show plays with this micro-macro idea that I think about a lot and that is fundamental to sort of the fractal geometry of nature. 2015 was a really pivotal year for me creatively. This was the first time I did a public art project, and this is at Temple University in Philadelphia. It's 18 laser-cut steel clouds that span about 70 feet, along with lights, LED programmable lights and light sensors that detect from dusk till dawn. And so they essentially go through this lighting program that mimics sky tone variations. You can see here on the right, if you look closely, there's these sort of twinkling stars. We were able to individually program these lights to mimic a twinkling star effect, which when I talked to students at Temple, they were lamenting the lack of, the sort of light pollution and the lack of stars in the sky. And so I created this as sort of a nod to them. This was also meant to create a safe space on campus that was sort of a dark, kind of less safe space. For me, working on this project was really instrumental in learning the quality of collaboration, and I think a lot of you can relate to this in your own fields, that when you work with other people in an interdisciplinary way, you can really achieve so much more and something greater than you can just on your own. And so I was able to create something working with engineers and architects and lighting designers and installers that I could have never created on my own. And so that was a really amazing lesson with this project. That same summer I was working on that project, I finally stepped foot on a research vessel. I didn't get in the submersible, but I actually got on a research vessel. This was 10 years after I made that call to Woods Hole. I wasn't going in a submersible, but we were mapping the ocean floor, which was something I had dreamed about doing. We were sailing from the Galapagos to San Diego. This was 10 years ago. And we were mapping the ocean floor as we went. So you can see here, there's this swath of data that's being revealed on the computer screen. Those are those sound waves going down and revealing this terrain that had never been seen before. Most of the ocean is unexplored. Only 20% of the ocean floor is mapped in high resolution, and that has happened, 10% of that has happened in like the last 5 years. So there's very little that we actually know in a clear way about the bottom of the ocean. We know more about Mars and the moon than we do about our own planet. I was expecting to work with the maps, but I was not expecting for us to be trailing a hurricane. But we, in fact, were trailing a hurricane, and we had very, very rough seas. And so I learned that I don't get seasick, which was a plus. But I also wanted to respond to sort of the motion of the ship. Everything was flying all over the place. And so I started pouring the paint onto the canvas. This was my studio. I had like 5 feet of space in their lab. But this is working in a 4D modeling program on the ship, taking the data of the mapping of the ocean floor and then moving through it through this animation that I created to simulate what it would be like to be sort of swimming underneath at the bottom of this mountain chain. This is underneath the Galapagos Islands. And so I took screen grabs from this animation and then brought them into paintings. And so this is a painting that was part of this series. This is 5 by 10 feet. Again, sort of showing the that kind of juxtaposition that I am interested in, the sort of atmospheric kind of poured paint, unrestrained and uncontrolled against the sort of delineated graphic mapping, which is, of course, incomplete because, as I mentioned, there's a lot that we don't know. These are more paintings from the series. I always say that my husband jokes that he never saw it coming I'd become a sailor when we got married, and I didn't either, but I became just enamored with being out at sea. And I wanted to go back. It was just an amazing experience to be on the open ocean and working with scientists and discovering what our planet is about. And so I was invited the following year on the Fall Corps research vessel to Tahiti and then sailing from Vietnam to Guam. And so I set up a studio in the wet lab of the ship. And I was working with satellite data so on the left you see the black blob is southern Vietnam, and the white squiggly line is the Mekong River. So you're seeing the Mekong River as it flows into the South China Sea, and we were looking at chlorophyll concentrations in the water. And so sort of mapping this trajectory of biology from freshwater to saltwater, and I was kind of inspired by these maps and creating these paintings. I was also working with mapping data on this 2-week trip and created these paintings on the ship. Through this process and through being out at sea and starting to meet scientists, I became involved in a network. I got invited into this project called the Ocean Memory Project. It's a really interesting project. It's a collective of artists, scientists, and people in the humanities that are reframing their research on the ocean in the context of memory. And memory sounds like a strange word maybe to use with the ocean because it's sort of an anthropomorphic word, but when you start thinking about the ocean and its inhabitants as one interconnected system that has agency and memory, it's really not so far-fetched. When you think about a drop of water having millions of microbes in it, how do you really separate the living from the non-living in the ocean? Not to mention that the ocean currents, the eddies, and the great circulation systems that are happening in the ocean, there is recall and there is repetition that's happening. And so this was a really fascinating project I've been part of since 2017. I met some great scientists through that project, including one named Mandy Joy at the University of Georgia. Mandy invited me on her expedition in 2018 on Alvin. I said, I've always wanted to go on Alvin, and she said, I'll take you. So in 2018, I boarded the Atlantis for 2 expeditions, actually, back to back. The first one was with Eric Cortez, who is the head of biology at Temple University. He and I had met years before, and he was trying to get me out to sea as well, and he finally invited me. It was an incredible experience. We were off the coast of Costa Rica. We were exploring, he studies coral and also sort of deep sea systems like methane seeps. And so essentially what we were looking at were these seamounts. You can see these seamounts subducting underneath the Costa Rican plate. They've got lots of organic material in them, and when they're being pressed underneath the Costa Rican plate, they release methane. And methane is a source, an energy source for organisms in the ocean. And so it's understanding that organisms feed off of chemicals other than what we breathe, like oxygen. And so it's amazing to think about these ecosystems that are happening and the spheres of influence around these methane seas. But the project I'm going to talk more about is the one I did with Mandy. And this is off the coast of Mexico in the Gulf of California. You can see on the left, there's this kind of jagged red line. That is a plate spreading boundary. It's essentially a big fissure in the ocean floor. You can see that ocean is really narrow. That's a nascent sea with 2 land masses really close together, Baja California and the coast of Mexico. And so essentially, you have what you would normally have at a plate spreading boundary where you have hydrothermal vents and maybe black smokers, but then you have these land masses that are dropping sediment down from their tributaries on top of these vents. And so you have a really interesting, all this heat and pressure kind of pressing down, of the sediment pressing down on the vents, and it causes oil to form very, very quickly in this location, which is really unique and one of the only places in the world, and it's essentially an incredible place to sort of learn about ancient processes happening in real time and to understand these sort of ecosystems that are happening at the very bottom in the dark, inhospitable, hostile environments. They're called extremophiles for a reason. So it was incredible to see this with my own eyes, to witness this. Being on the ship, we're living together on a ship, and we're all working together in the lab. It's a very, it's a hard to describe experience, but I consider it to be sort of an emergent process where like the whole is more than the sum of its parts. I, of course, am being inspired by what the scientists are doing, but they are also being inspired by what the artist is doing, and there's this sort of reciprocal kind of exchange happening. Going down in the submersible is really like a spiritual, metaphysical experience as you're kind of sinking without any motors for an hour and a half to 2 hours in the dark, and all you're seeing is bioluminescent light for a good part of that. It really changes your perspective on humanity and our place in the world, considering that the oceans cover more than 70% of our planet. It's mind-blowing, and when I had that experience, I wanted to certainly create a piece that would share the wonder of bioluminescence. When you're down here, again, you saw some of this in the video, there are these yellow-colored mats, all different colors actually. They're microbial mats that are feeding off of chemicals. They're feeding off of methane, they're feeding off of hydrogen sulfide, and then they in turn are food for greater other organisms like these, oh my God, Riftia tube worms with the red plumes. There's a wild, wild world down there in the dark. If you zoom in on these microbial mats, they create these open architectures to allow for the flow of hydrogen sulfide and a little bit of oxygen to maximize their own growth and to allow other organisms to kind of pass through. I was really fascinated by these structures. I'm interested in sort of repeating patterns in nature. We would take samples from these microbial mats, and if you zoom in, you can see that they create these sort of filaments, and they're these colonial organisms. I was painting little paintings on the ship, inspired by what we were seeing, and then I brought these ideas back to Philadelphia and created this 22-foot tall installation. This was actually exhibited at the Georgia Museum of Art. Mandy Joy, who I mentioned, my collaborator, is from the University of Georgia. The university became interested in our collaboration, this sort of art-science collaboration, and invited me to be a visiting chair to the university from 2018 to 2019. And so I created an exhibit for their museum and met with students over the course of several weeks. Students of all different ages. I really love kind of talking and engaging students who may never see, people in general who may never see the things that I saw, so that I can pass on this information. One of the things that I got really excited about with this project and this exhibition was the piece on the right. It's called Shimmer. It is inspired by hydrocarbon structures, which make up the oil I mentioned is forming in this location. And it's also inspired by the bioluminescence. I worked with LED programmable lights. We were able to program each light to mimic video footage of a certain organism called a siphonophore, which is like this gelatinous creature with really long tentacles that creates trails of light to confuse predators. And so with the 64-foot long installation, there are motion sensors on either end of the piece. So when you approach the piece, it creates this disturbance in the piece, almost as if you're a predator. And so this piece really touched me on the idea of really wanting to create things that were more immersive and interactive. And I'm hoping to do more of this type of work going forward. This piece also was on view for a year at the museum, and then they had a really positive feedback from the community, and so they ended up acquiring it permanently. So it's permanently on display at the museum, which was an honor for me. Moving to some of my public art projects, this is the Convergence mural in Philadelphia. You may have seen it if you've been on the Schuylkill River or like on the I-76 going to the airport maybe. It is a meditation on the Schuylkill River and surrounding environment. I really wanted to capture, well, first of all, I need to say that I'm not afraid to go down in a submersible, but I'm terrified of heights, so this was really scary. But I had a great team that did a lot of the heavy lifting. This was done in 2019, the summer of 2019. So in 2 months, we were able to create a 63 by 124-foot mural. I wanted to capture some of the energy of the intersecting lines in the environment that I was seeing from the rooftop. You can see Penn's campus, the Schuylkill River, the Schuylkill Banks Trail and boardwalks, I-76, the South Street Bridge, et cetera. I wanted to create these intersecting lines in the piece, and I also wanted to capture some of the cultural relevance of the Schuylkill River in this exact space. And there's a festival called the Adunde Festival, which happens every year. They congregate on the South Street Bridge, and it's a festival of African heritage. So I wanted to capture some of the colors and patterns from the festival, as well as thinking about these pathways that are happening at this location. The mural is called Convergence. And for me, it was really gratifying to have a piece that was very visible. It's visible from the highway, and a lot of people have gotten to enjoy it, and it sort of guides your eye to the skyline of Philadelphia, which was intentional. And so it's been a real honor to have this piece in the city. With all of my murals, I'll just show you a few. I'm interested in kind of humanizing the built environment and improving the experience for people passing by. This is a very different kind of piece, also a public art piece, but rather than in an urban setting, it's in a rural setting. It is called Ridge and Valley, and it is in outside of Harrisburg, PA. And it is a nearly 70-foot long Corten steel installation that is made by materials from that region. And it was created and installed during the pandemic in the summer of 2020. It was great because it was outdoors, so there was no hiccup with it. It's inspired by ecoregion and geologic maps of Pennsylvania and the Appalachian Mountains that course through Pennsylvania. So it was sort of an engineering feat to create. There's like a big concrete foundation at the bottom. The pieces are joined together rather than with welding with tongue and groove system to account for contraction and expansion in the environment. And so you can see they kind of slide seamlessly together. You can see here a lot of the really dramatic bends and folds of the Pennsylvania salient, which is a feature that's right where this location is in central Pennsylvania. One of the gratifying things about a piece that's in a sanctuary like this is seeing how it changes with the seasons. And so from spring to summer, it really kind of shifts. One of the things that really interested me about this piece is, again, this idea of juxtaposition. You have this really robust 17-ton piece of Corten steel, but then you have these really lacy cutouts, and so there's sort of a delicacy to it. And they kind of mimic the meadow grasses and the trees. In the wintertime, light passes through the piece and kind of expands the footprint of the piece and creates these sort of drawings in the snow. But one of the things I really wanted to do when thinking about sustainability, for that matter, is that with this weathering steel, the cutouts were really massive. This piece was 1.5 inches thick. And so the pieces themselves, the cutouts were really massive, and I didn't want to discard them. I wanted to do something with them. And so I ended up creating this pathway in the woods in a different location on this at the sculpture park. We found a clearing in this young woods, and so I created this piece. It was kind of interesting to work with the negative spaces from the other piece to create a positive piece with this. And the difference in sort of execution and the process of making this was so different. The other piece required a lot of engineering and design and fabrication, obviously, and this was me kind of just moving pieces around and being really spontaneous. And so it was really cool to have these two pieces kind of be siblings. Over time, we put soil in between the. Hold on one second. Yes. Finding the negative spaces from these pieces that were the negative spaces of something else was kind of interesting, but we wanted to plant moss in the negative spaces. And over time, over the past 3 years, actually this was from 2023, it's really evolved and changed. And so this is really, to me, an environmental piece. It's a piece that's going to shift and change and settle. And I was actually just there, and the moss has sort of grown over. I'm almost wondering if the iron from the steel is leached, like, doing something to create more growth. I don't know. I'm not. That's for somebody else in this room to just figure out. But Anyway, so yeah, it's been really interesting to see this piece evolve. I also created a painting for the Welcome Center. I welcome all of you to go to this place, by the way. It's called the Bauer Sculpture Park and Native Gardens. It's a really lovely place. There's hiking trails and stuff. But I made a painting inspired by, again, the geologic maps of the region. Right before the pandemic, I got another opportunity to go out to sea really quickly on a small ship in the Salish Sea off the coast of Washington State. There we were looking at freshwater to saltwater inputs like microbes, the microbial communities that are coming out of the rivers from that sea into the Pacific Ocean, and thinking about like pressure, the difference in pressure between deep water upwelling into this the Salish Sea, and thinking about how these microbes adapt and adjust. This was with the Ocean Memory Project, that project I was talking about, thinking about how microbes adapt. And I was, of course, painting on the ship. It was a tiny ship. We were like elbowing each other, you know, at the one like surface. But it was amazing to sort of paint, working with things that we were collecting. These are diatoms that form incredible patterns. When the pandemic hit, I was really not able to get out to sea. Things were kind of halted as they were. And so I was actually invited to do a project with a biotech company in Philadelphia that was researching antibodies for the COVID vaccine, which was kind of exciting. This was like early 2021. No, I didn't have the vaccine yet. I'm wearing a cloth mask. I mean, and we're working with COVID variants. It was like mind-blowing looking back, but we thought we were safe. Anyway, we were working with spike proteins of different COVID variants that this company, they engineered these particles that have the spike protein on the membrane of the particle, and inside the particle they had green fluorescent protein. And what that did was they would introduce that to human cells in a petri dish, and the green fluorescent protein would, when the spike protein attached to the human cell, the cell would glow green. And so it was a way of sort of visualizing the disease entering human cells, because the virus was too small to see. And so even though this was a very dark, morbid subject, it was really kind of fascinating to watch this happen. And they did a time lapse of this as well, which I use later. I was also really interested in looking at the cells themselves and looking at how they connect to each other and form these networks, these like micro societies within our body. They reach out with little arms and connect and communicate with one another. So I made paintings inspired by this residency that were displayed at the Science Center in Philadelphia. And to me, it was kind of fascinating to see how these networks within our bodies almost look like circuitry, computer circuitry, and how these kind of patterns happen. Here is the piece that I did that incorporated sound as well as the time lapse I just mentioned of the cells glowing. I was thinking about how the cells, how the disease was spreading within our bodies, but I wanted to think about how it was spreading within our community and what could be done about this. I thought about, and I'm going to start playing something. It's going to be dark, but you're going to hear something. I started thinking about all those waves, the COVID like data waves that you would see. You'd see these waves of the spike, and it became numbing after a while. So then I thought, well, what if we could take that data and soundify it, like put it to sound instead of just looking at it? And so I worked with a composer to create this piece. And essentially, I worked with COVID data in Philadelphia, working with first cases, then deaths, and then vaccinations. And so early on, you hear, the first lines you're hearing are the cases, then lagging behind are the deaths, and then eventually the vaccine, which we probably won't get to. This is a 5-minute long piece. But anyway, that was sort of superimposed over this piece, which was essentially backlit with lights that I programmed to mimic the cells glowing green in the time lapse. So it's sort of like this micro macro take. And essentially, the bottom line is that the sounds at the end, the higher pitched sounds of the vaccine, which come later, kind of drown out the cases and deaths as those start to fall. And so it's sort of a case for vaccine efficacy. The cool thing about this show is that at the end, I partnered with the Pennsylvania Philharmonic, and they did a quintet. There was a score made, and they performed it at the closing reception, which was kind of cool. It was not an easy piece to hear, but it was interesting. Another residency, another collaboration I did during the pandemic was with a planetary geologist at the University of Alabama who reached out to me and wanted to collaborate. She was funded by NASA working with these small, really rare meteorites, billion-year-old meteorites lent by NASA that had never been seen before by anyone. And so she was cutting them open, and we were looking together on Zoom through like a major, like super high-res microscope. And so this is actually a Martian a meteorite from Mars that you can see the really tight crystal formations, and she would tell me all these stories about how that formed. And she was studying the chemical analysis and the chemistry of these rocks and how they kind of traveled through the solar system. It was wild what she could find through just studying these rocks. But I was interested in these patterns, once again, thinking about how they kind of mimic circuitry and these sort of like intricate networks, and how these patterns tend to repeat themselves in nature. And so here we are looking at billion-year-old rocks, and so this really gets me. This is a 5 billion-year-old iron meteorite from the core of a protoplanet that didn't survive and somehow ended up on our planet. We cut it open, and you can see this perfectly preserved six-fold symmetry of crystals that were hardening, or minerals that were hardening and crystallized this way. It is very much the same as six-fold symmetry that you see in snowflakes or ice crystals. And here we have a 5 billion-year-old thing that came from another part of our solar system, and it's the same. And it reminds me of, there's a quote by John Muir that every time you pick apart anything in nature, you're connected back to the universe. I mean, literally, we are connected. This is a universal thing. I made paintings sort of tracing these patterns, and had an exhibition that was exhibited at the University of Alabama, where she was a professor. And this was in 2022. In 2023, I was back out at sea. The ships were running again. It was great. I ended up back in Hawaii, which is really kind of coming full circle for me, because that's where I first discovered that map, if you recall. And in Hawaii, we were actually exploring the next Hawaiian island, which is currently a submarine volcano. And we were exploring it through an ROV, a remotely operated vehicle. So I didn't go down. But here, you might think this looks like Mars, maybe. I don't know. This is actually underneath, in this Hawaiian, in the crater of this volcano. All of that yellow you see are, those are iron oxidizing microbes. They are feeding off of iron that is leaching out of, it's basically basalt rock and water, and they're feeding off of the iron that's coming out of the rock. Essentially, there is nothing else there, and there's life, like life somehow found a way. It's amazing. I was on the ship, I had a little area, I was painting, inspired by looking at these microbes with high resolution microscopy and looking at the mapping. You can see here, these are these iron oxidizing microbes that form these incredible intricate networks that mimic other things. They mimic tree branches, and here they are at the bottom of the ocean. So I made paintings about that residency. This, hope I'm not doing too badly with time here, but this is another project I did in 2023. It's called Blue Dreams, and it's a video projection that's 35 feet long. It's at the National Academy of Sciences. And this piece was also with the Ocean Memory Project, and it's about thinking about the magnitude of microbes in the deep sea, the magnitude of how they are mediating processes on our planet, mediating global ocean chemistry, mediating the air we breathe. I worked with a computer modeler. I worked with several scientists on this project, and a computer modeler who took one of my paintings and kind of pixelated it and then animated it in the video. And essentially, this piece is really meant to kind of get people to think maybe more deeply about what's happening at the bottom of the ocean. I think we think about this idea of like conservation and wanting to save the whales and take care of our ocean. But when you start thinking about the ocean and these deep sea microbes as actually mediating our planet and mediating the air we breathe, then it becomes a lot more personal. You know, we are actually connected to the bottom of the ocean through this cycle. I finally got actually back out in the submersible. This was exactly a year ago. We went back to the Gulf of California, where I described that whole area with the two land masses close together in the Gulf of California. And we were back, and we were out for 30 days. This was my longest trip. Again, there is a palpable energy on a ship when you're living together everybody is working and being just really charged by what we're discovering, and the submarine's going down every day, and people are coming up, and we're looking at samples, and there's just a real energy to it. You know, one of the things that I really value is that there are a lot of scientists on the ship, and they're all sort of really tuned into their area of research. So it's like there's one that's like they're looking at the genomes, and somebody else was looking at viruses in these microbes at the bottom of the ocean. Other people were looking at the chemistry. Other people are, looking at the mapping. And I was there looking at everything and sort of trying to synthesize all of these different projects and research and bring them all together and see the continuity and the similarity and the patterns that were happening. And so there's a real value in sort of getting out of your silos. And like I said, the scientists themselves would then see what I was doing, and it would sort of reframe their own research. They started thinking about their own research in a different way. So it's a fascinating experience to kind of work together and to really be living together. But nothing could prepare me for the trip that I took in the submersible with Mandy, my collaborator. We unexpectedly hit this massive black smoker field, which was not on the map that we had. And it was both terrifying and absolutely incredible. I mean, we were seeing literally like these primordial forces, these elements coming out of the ocean floor like iron. This iron is then, I've been learning through other scientists that I've been working with, this iron is key to our own survival. And it's like, this is how our planet first started. This iron, these inputs coming from the bottom of the ocean. The iron actually disperses throughout the world's oceans, and they originally thought that it only kind of settled in a small area, but they now understand that the iron is these particles are going much further, thousands of miles away, all the way to surface waters on the other side of the globe, and they're feeding surface bacteria, cyanobacteria, that are actually producing a lot of the air we breathe. And so we are literally connected to the bottom of the ocean through this iron. This is a series I did. I did a painting a day on the ship, and I exhibited these in September at the Bridget Mayer Gallery. These are all sort of inspired by the research that we were doing on the ship and the experience of being on the ship. Throughout all of these projects, I'm painting in the studio, thinking about these themes, thinking about micro, macro, thinking about bioluminescent communication, thinking about microbial networks in the deep sea, thinking about fractal geometry of nature, and the way everything is connected in the natural world. Thinking about when you start to tune in, there are these networks happening everywhere, including underneath the ground, which I'll get to in a minute. But it's really been fascinating for me to kind of work with different scientists and sort of realize that everything, it just keeps corroborating my understanding of how connected everything is. And so my work is really about wanting to create a sense of awe and wonder about the natural world, to create that sense of investment in wanting to take care of it. Some ongoing projects, this is really quick, the Immersion Project, which is working with scientists that have been researching the degradation of deep sea corals in the Gulf of Mexico since the Deepwater Horizon oil spill of 2010. And we're trying to create it's a concept for a traveling exhibit inspired by corals that would then have a second life as an artificial reef in the Gulf of Mexico to help rehabilitate those corals that are struggling and the ecosystems that live off of them. This is one iteration of the project. This is now a permanent thing at the Mississippi Aquarium. We created several pieces it's an immersive experience with sound and AR, where you're seeing what might happen when things start to become rehabilitated. I'm just showing you a tiny clip right here. But this piece ended up being a permanent piece at the Mississippi Aquarium, but we're still hoping to create the pieces that will then be deployed into the ocean. And so we're working on a project now for that. I'm also working on a project called Hidden Architectures, working with somebody who studies Arctic sea ice. If you think about a big block of ice, you don't think there's life inside of the ice. Maybe things are living on the ice, but actually the whole interior of the ice is made up of these brine channels that are harboring microscopic life that are then feeding other organisms at the bottom of the ice in the water. And so it's this whole food web that's happening, and how is climate change affecting that system. Lastly, I'm working on this project called Flow. This is a concept for a really large installation. Again, this is the idea of the iron that's flowing out of the bottom of these hydrothermal vents and traveling across the world, and this idea of connectivity. This piece is a smaller version I did in Philadelphia, and again, this was done in my show in September, but again, thinking about this idea that we rely on iron. We have iron in every cell of our bodies. You think about essentially every living thing relies on iron, and so it's incredible to imagine that a lot of this iron is actually, some of it anyway, is coming from the bottom of the ocean. Lastly, I am starting another collaboration with a scientist, an evolutionary biologist who is studying fungal networks underground. Trees communicate with each other through intricate underground fungal networks, much like social networks or neural networks. Mycorrhizal networks allow signals to be sent between trees in a forest, transferring chemicals, water, nutrients between them. Older trees can provide excess resources through these networks to seedlings or trees that are diseased or malnourished, which increases survival and improves the collective whole. We could learn a lot from these trees, right? The ability to communicate is a foundational process in forest ecosystems and a key part of how forests thrive. Really, to bring ourselves into harmony with the natural world, we must return to seeing humanity as part of it. And the belief that we're separate from nature is said to be one of the root causes of the ecological crisis we now face. I wanted to close with some words from Pope Francis. I thought it was really appropriate and really spoke to what I've been talking about in terms of this idea of interconnectivity. We have forgotten that we ourselves are dust of the earth. Our very bodies are made up of her elements. We breathe her air and we receive life and refreshment from her waters. May the relationship between man and nature not be driven by greed to manipulate and exploit, but may the divine harmony between beings and creation be conserved in the logic of respect and care. There can be no renewal of our relationship with nature without a renewal of humanity itself. Thank you. Questions or?
Yeah.
Okay.
If people have something you have to go to, we'll give a second for people to get up if you have, because I know we have busy people here. And then we're going to take questions afterwards, so we'll just give everyone 2 seconds.
How's the tea? Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Oh, yeah. I wanted to, especially with the listeners. I was going to say that one, like dreaming, like, can achieve it. Thank you. It seemed like it was Wow, it's amazing.
Could we give Rebecca another round of applause?
By the way, this show is on view right now if you want to see it. If you go to the Schuylkill Center, which is really lovely, take a walk in the woods. It's good for the soul. So.
I'm going to take the privilege of asking the first question, but please, if people have questions, please think. My question is it's a comment and a question. Are you thinking of, when I was watching this and listening to you, it struck me that you're giving us perceptions of the world that we live in, that we wouldn't normally see. Whether it's the bioluminescent creatures and how they move and the predator's point of view, or how the moss is growing. Is this something that you're thinking about perception when you are putting these together? Or are you being the perceiver? Because you're giving us a view of the world that I've never seen.
Wow, I'm not sure I know how to answer that. That's a really hard question. I don't know that I don't know that there's intention. Like, I think I'm sort of chatting, like I'm I'm sort of a sponge when I'm like working with scientists. I'm like, just, it's all the unscripted conversations that are happening when I'm on the ship, and I'm like, oh my God, there's like all these connections, because again, like I've worked with different scientists and I'm like sort of piecing together what different scientists are doing. And so I'm sort of just kind of synthesizing and channeling all of it. And then I'm just trying to get it out on a canvas or like come up with an idea to sort of express it. But I don't know that I think I'm trying to share some of what I am perceiving, if that makes sense. But I think, you know, one of the things I should mention is that with my work, I wanted first and foremost to be a visual, visceral experience. If you didn't hear me speak, if you didn't have this backstory, you could still appreciate the work and just enjoy it. But then once you understand what it's about or the sort of research behind it, then it could become more meaningful and it could be an enriched experience. But it's a visual language. I want it to operate on a visual level. So, yeah. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
I don't think so.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's interesting that it's you as the perceiver, but you're perceiving things that most of us will never get to perceive.
I know, and I feel like you know, it's like the privilege of my life to have been able to do this, and I feel a sense of responsibility to share it, you know. So,
Thank you.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
You and then you, okay.
Oh,
No, you go ahead first. Your hand was raised first. I'm making the call.
first of all, thank you very much for
Sure.
a visually wonderful experience. You know, I'm a scientist, and just to see these visuals was very inspiring. And it seems to me, you know, relative to Joseph's question, that it's both your in turns, it's both your perception of, you know, how you perceive it, but also, and what really impressed me several times was a scientifically informed depiction. So it's this really wonderful combination of those two to me, you know, that it was scientifically informed in your collaborations and many with scientists, but also your interpretation at times.
It's true. And it's interesting, yeah, and it is true. I mean, there is artistic license, and